All right, welcome to Retire Japan. Today I'm talking with Ray Saito, who is a very interesting guy. I've been following him for a year or two now, mainly through his Konichi Value, which is a Substack and a YouTube channel that I'm aware of. There might be more. We'll hear from Ray in a minute. But he writes about investing in Japan and kind of big picture stories about Japan. Really interesting stuff, really well written. And I've really enjoyed following his stuff. And today I get to talk to him. So welcome to Retire Japan, Ray Saito. Nice to see you today. And I'm excited about this conversation.
Well, thank you so much. I'm glad to be here.
Cool. So just for anyone who hasn't come across you before, could you give us a quick self-introduction, kind of quick background on you and, how you came to be here in Japan writing about stocks?
First, to start with, I'm half Japanese and half Swedish. And so I got a true mix of cultures living in both countries, basically half and half. And
that's quite the combination.
I came to Japan. Yeah, I know. And it's very different in cultures, I'd say. So I got a, schizophrenic mix. I came to Japan last time, the time I live here now, around 5 years ago. So I got a good, 1 year before COVID. And this time I came here really to work in finance and work a bit in investing. And with my work being what it is, I realized that talking to people outside of Japan, this is just a huge missed opportunity here. I feel like people have an idea of Japan, and I work here and I just see something completely different. And I've also been very interested in finance forever. Basically, my education is in economics, so that made me start Konichi Value. Basically, this part website, part YouTube channel, where I try to both make people that are interested in finance, but their eyes haven't yet opened to Japan. And also people you deal with probably every day, people who are very interested in money and saving, but they just don't have that push to make it happen. And I'm really trying to appeal to both those people with, an accessible language, more humor, and some education sprinkled around my website and YouTube channel. So that's basically what I do, and all of it about Japan.
Yeah, so I'm really impressed with how you structure your posts. There's lots of research in there. I always learn a lot from them, and your YouTube videos are really good. So do you have any kind of background in video and so on?
I mean, I have some background. I'm using more complicated tools by the day, but so far I realized that sticking to the basics, doing simple editing, being able to produce some quantity and not spending all your days doing tiny video edits is the way to go.
Yeah, I think so. Like consistency and putting something out, every month, every week, I think is maybe more important than the quality at the beginning.
Yeah.
Do you know that pottery thing where, the professor gives the class an assignment to make a really good pot, and half the class just makes hundreds and hundreds of pots, and the other half spend the whole time making one pot?
Oh, I haven't heard about this.
The students that made loads of pots made better pots than the guys that really focused on one quality one, because they were getting the reps in. So I think YouTube's similar. You got to get your reps in, and you'll get better over time that way.
Yeah, I'm reluctantly saying I'm that camp.
Cool. So you work in finance then?
Yeah, I work in technology and finance. So I work for a financial company, mostly doing their technology infrastructure. So I see the worst of both worlds.
And that obviously influences your hobby and your side work, which is researching stocks and writing about stocks and finance and so on.
Yeah, I mean, they say, you should keep hobbies outside of work. And it is cool because when your hobby connects with your work, you can kind of get the insights, and become more agile in what you're seeing at work and seeing what's wrong and what's right in a way I wouldn't do if I just did my job to get money.
Right. Yeah. It's more fun as well, isn't it? So as long as you take an interest in things. So could you tell us a bit more about Konichi Value then? What it is you do, how it started, and how you see it going forward?
So it started basically, as I said in my introduction, that I was very shocked about just what people think about Japan, even inside Japan, what people have ideas about the Japanese stock market or Japanese housing. And I realized that there's a huge discrepancy with the former idea of what Japan used to be and what it is today. And that discrepancy, that anger about that discrepancy grew. And I realized during COVID, when everybody was inside, that this is a perfect opportunity to see if people are actually interested in knowing that there's a discrepancy and knowing if they want to know the truth. And so that's how I started Konichi Value. And it already from the beginning, it became kind of a quirky project. So, I have the Irasteya behind me, as you can see, which is these Japanese free pictures you can take and anybody can use without any license. And it's kind of like Japan is kind of weirdly quirky, right? So in one side, it's very serious, like with finance, etc. It's extremely gray and dull, and things has to be done a certain way with everything. But the other side is this quirkiness and mascots and people really trying to be inviting in whatever they're doing. And so I'm trying to combine those pieces, because I think that is the biggest hurdle in the world for finance, is that it's either for people who are extremely savvy, or it's people who don't know anything and just let an advisor do everything. And I think that that's not the average person, is somewhere in between, right? And that's the person I'm really trying to adhere to. That's why the language is quite, I do like thorough analysis. I do things that anybody could use in real ways with numbers and graphs, etc. But at the same time, I do it with a more inviting language and inviting pictures and more quirky and fun ways of expressing myself.
Yeah, I find that. So I'm not a particularly numbers kind of guy, and I always find your posts very easy to follow along to. Would you say most of your readers are outside Japan then, as opposed to in Japan?
So I've actually just connected all my tools to Google Analytics. So I have the good raw data now, right? And it's a 50-50. So 50% are in Japan, mostly in Tokyo, and I assume most of them are English native. So, a mix of people who lived abroad probably, and also foreigners. And then the other 50% are divided in 4 big countries. So it's the US is the biggest one, and then Canada and Singapore are close seconds, and then India is there too. So it's kind of like I expected the US, but the other countries, I'm a little bit surprised, but it makes so much sense when you think about it longer.
So it's nice to have that kind of audience as well, particularly for, I don't know, monetization purposes.
Yeah, definitely.
Because the overseas audiences tend to be worth more than the domestic Japanese audience, at least in my experience. And we are, of course, 90-odd% in Japan. At RetireJapan. So you write a lot about stocks, or you do kind of analyses of stocks. So how do you go about thinking about choosing stocks?
Yeah. I mean, that's in my name. So as you can see, it's Konichi Value, right? So Konichiwa is the first Konichi, and then value is value investing. And so I'm a firm believer in value investing. And that's, it's basically, I think the best way to explain it is like value investors, I think, see stocks more like people buying houses, let's say. So if you buy a house, you would need to check everything. You want to check the foundation, you want to check if there's any mold, you want to check if it's earthquake proof. And that's value investing. We invest not because of a certain time or because it's the stock's on sale. We invest because we think it's a really good stock where the foundations are clear. And so that's 100% my investment strategy, that I believe that, it's not about timing. It's about finding the stocks and just keeping them, as long as you would keep a house if you can.
Okay, so you're going for the Warren Buffett kind of excellent stocks for a good price rather than good stocks for a cheap price.
Exactly.
Do you also invest in indices, or do you only have individual stocks in your portfolio?
I do both. I think everybody should do both. And I definitely invest in the Nikkei 225, the Japanese index, and the Topics, also a Japanese index, and a substantial amount in the American S&P 500 or SPY.
Nice. So you do that kind of America and Japan rather than the whole world.
Yeah. Sweden is, as a half Swedish person, I think the Swedish market is super interesting too. Something I might not talk about too much today, but a substantial amount in specific Swedish stocks are definitely part of my portfolio.
Do you have any advice? Because you're talking about people who maybe don't have enough information to take action and so on. Do you have any kind of specific advice for someone who's just starting out?
Yeah, so this, as I said, this is like what I'm really trying to fulfill, right? And I think I found it very hard to bridge the gap, right? Of making people that say, oh, I want to buy stocks and to actually make them interested and to do the research. But I found the easiest way is, like you have to put your money where your mouth is. So I think, first of all, as I think you promote too, it's great to invest monthly in an index. And that's great for most people who generally don't want to look at balance sheet or want to know that much about companies. For them, an index is great because over a long enough period of time, the markets are always going up. And so if you invest in an index, you really don't have to think more than to put money aside every month. And once you get to that habit, it can become interesting to start looking at individual stocks.
Completely agree. So basically index investing is the kind of gateway drug for stock investing or stock picking.
Exactly. And it's like to build a habit, right? Because I mean, I have a sister who's she's not very interested in stocks, right? And in the beginning, when she said, the market was probably doing really well, and she said, I really want to buy stocks, right? I want to get rich out of stocks, right? She probably watched some TikTok video or something where somebody got rich off stocks or Bitcoin or whatever. And in the beginning, I was like, okay, this is what you need to do. This is what you need to check. And she would pretend to listen. But then a month or 2 months later, it was just pennies in like the stock account I created for her. And so that made me really reconsider how to reach out to people. And I think first thing is to get the habit. So if you just start with an index fund in your country or the S&P 500, which is the base, you just do that monthly for a couple of months, see how it feels, and, maybe log into your account a couple of times. Once you get that habit, I truly think that it's so pivotal to start looking at least one stock in your portfolio. If you, for example, just love Toyota for whatever reason, right? If you just put 1,000 yen in there for fun, because you have a strong belief that Toyota will beat Tesla in electric cars in 10 years or 5 years, right? And so if you just put some money, just a symbolic amount of money in there, and then you will naturally start looking at the news differently. Whenever you see something about Toyota, you will instantly click on it. You will start reading what's happening. And there is no better feeling in the world, I'd say, than if you were right. So let's say in 5 years, it's a huge, BBC article, whatever, that Toyota is selling more electric cars than Tesla. And you just be like, damn, I'm so right. And then the second thing would be, I should have invested more, right? But that kick, that adrenaline kick, I think that's enough to make anyone get an interest in stock and like start digging deeper to find, things they love. Because stocks are really, you own part of a company. That's really important to understand.
Okay, so talking about stocks and owning them, why do you like Nintendo so much? Because this keeps coming up on Konichi Value, and you're all in on Nintendo. So can you explain that a bit more?
I mean, who doesn't like Nintendo, right? But I think, first of all, it's an amazing company. Like, that's how I start all my research, is trying to find just good companies, right? Before I look at the numbers and if they're undervalued or whatever, I just want to know if the company's good. And Nintendo's one of those, it's like Nike or Apple, like it just has this like following that's crazy, and the management has been so consistently good, and they've done, they've created some of the most interesting IPs and products in the world. And so that's the first reason, right? Also, growing up with them helps, of course. My favorite game is still Zelda Ocarina of Time on the Nintendo 64. Then secondly, I think it is weird when you look at the numbers of Nintendo, because it's very cheap compared to like Sony or Microsoft or Apple, companies that could be their competitor, right? And it's some of the reasons, I think, is because most of the people who invest in the Japanese market are finance people. So they look at, more hard numbers. Like Nintendo is kind of they're reaching like saturation on the Nintendo Switch, etc. And they're just doing their predictions, Nintendo's growing XYZ, and that's why we should invest this much money. Or they just missed out completely. But I really see like Nintendo is going through a shift. And this is my thesis. This is why I love them so much. Where the management have finally realized that Super Mario or Zelda or Peach or whatever, they are stronger than many Disney characters. And kids have actually been shown to know more about Super Mario than they know about Snow White or Lion King or something, right? And the management have finally realized this, and they're pushing out Nintendo's IPs to movies, to merchandise, to other consoles, just to have like the reach that these IPs truly can reach. And then you see Disney, on the other hand, doing absolutely horribly with their new movies. And people are talking about the woke mob or whatever. I'm not that into that, but it's just interesting to see how not to utilize their IPs, right? And Nintendo's doing the opposite. They're doing it just right with the new Super Mario movie, the new Zelda game, the new Pikmin game, that are all blowing up like crazy. And so I see my thesis as Nintendo actually being able to slowly overthrow Disney in many of Disney's own areas, and at the same time growing revenue and growing audiences in a way that's much bigger than even today.
That's quite a compelling argument. So you basically you think that the IP was maybe undervalued until now, and they're going to be able to realize the true value in the future.
Yeah. I mean, just one simple number that I think everyone can grasp is that even today, when Nintendo has actually gone up very much with the Japanese stock market, Disney is still 31 times higher in valuation compared to their earnings than Nintendo. And to me, it's just insane that Disney, that's been failing now for, 5 years, their profits are 5 times more valuable than Nintendo's. That doesn't make sense to me. And I think that's where I'm seeing the discrepancy and seeing that I can maybe utilize the leverage to earn a lot of money.
Nice.
But again, this is a long-term play, right? So Nintendo might go down, I don't know, 20, 30% this year, with the economy and stuff. But if you look long enough in the horizon, I think Nintendo is a very sure bet.
So in terms of resources that people might be able to access, obviously Konichi Value is a good resource, but do you have any other kind of recommendations in terms of books or social media accounts or websites or YouTube and so on?
Well, first off, just for everyone who's trying to find like a super tool to find stocks or anything, if you're already there, you probably know what to use. But first, just use Google Finance and Yahoo Finance. They're free and they're great. They have 90% of the numbers you need. And then if you want to know more about, finance philosophy, etc., I'd say again, like I've recommended books in the past, and I feel like the people who read them are people who don't need to read them. Because it's a big undertaking, right? Like if I tell you, like, read this 400-page book, maybe you'll do it. But if you're not that interested, you probably stop after 10 pages. So I think like the way to really get into finance is YouTube. And there I have some really good recommendations.
Oh, okay.
So like this, I might be a bit biased, but the Swedish Investor is a great YouTube channel. He basically makes stories out of value investing, stories of people who are fighting against Wall Street or who are fighting against, the big bad banks or something, and how they can win because they're using value investing. It's very compelling, very easy to understand. So that's
is it in Swedish?
It's in English.
Oh, good.
So yeah, even you can listen to it if you want to.
Awesome.
And then Plain Bagel, maybe you heard about him. He's a big finance YouTuber, and he just does like a guy on a mic with a camera and just talks about what's happening in the world. But he talks about it like without the, like the TikTok hype, like this is how you earn $1 million or whatever. He just like tells what's happening and, doesn't bring in Illuminati as soon as something crazy happens. And he's just like a sound voice in the world of finance, which is so rare, to be honest. Yeah, I just wanted to mention Japanalysis and Asianometry too.
Ooh.
You probably heard about them. They're both like Asia YouTuber. Japanalysis to YouTube videos on Japan. Just super interesting stuff.
I'd just like to ask you about your personal finances, because obviously Retire Japan, we talk about how people are, organizing their financial life so that they can be safe and enjoy things. But how do you go about doing that? What's your kind of strategy from here on forward financially?
I've always have the idea of being able to not work for a year whenever I want to. And I think that's the first goal I reached. So after studies, I made very sure I have enough money to live a year without doing anything. And still, it's not like I just had that money lying around. I was making it work by investing it in stocks and stuff. But I think like when you get that freedom, it's very easy to start planning the rest of your life. And so that's number one. And that's something I would recommend to everyone. Like 1 year of income in your bank account, in stocks, whatever, something that, not crazy risky, not all in a cryptocurrency that's completely new, but, you can still take risks when you're younger, right? And that money is really for if you want to try something new, start a business, whatever. You just have that money so that you can do it. And to have that, work becomes so much easier, right? Because I know I can quit tomorrow if I want to, and I'll be fine. I have more than a year to find a new job. And I think that has made my life so much easier and freer. And me being able to tell, I want to have a vacation next week to my boss without feeling like, oh my God, I might lose my job.
Mm.
That's number one. That's just the hygiene. And after that, I'm doing like probably most Japanese people. I'm investing in the NISA account. So I'm trying to max that out. And they're going to renew the NISA now, right? So I can put around 3 million yen of savings
Yes,
tax
that's
free.
very nice.
Yeah. So that's something I definitely am going to do. And I think that's just such a good benchmark for people. Like, if you can save 3 million yen a year, that is a really good start to having first financial freedom today, but also, being able to retire maybe before you're 80 years old,
Yeah, I think like you said, like just getting that first amount saved up, that's going to set you on a path where it's going to be easy for you to save and invest multiples of that. So
Right.
you
And it's
you
just,
focus on investing every month, I guess.
yeah, definitely. Like when the, money comes in my account, it's automatically withdrawn. And that's the only way to make sure that you're saving every month.
Do you have an idea of your saving rate?
It's around 25%, I'd say. Yeah, 25%, 30%.
That's very decent.
I mean, I
So,
want to get to 50, but this is good when you're living in Tokyo.
so what are your views on the FIRE movement?
I mean, I think it's really good. Like, FIRE movements are all about value too, because they're long-term investors, right? So most FIRE people are not talking about uh, like pink slip stocks or whatever. I think it's a bit risky. I've always dreamt of having the kind of money that the FIRE movement does, so I can retire right now, just if I wanted to, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's tough because like once if you say you set a hard goal, like a hard fire goal, especially if you don't do fat fire, which is I think a $10 million or something crazy. And I think that the philosophy is extremely good and a lot of people are doing it right. But it's a lot of this like I think it's like the American grind mindset kind of comes into it. So it's like you work really hard, you sacrifice everything in your life, like you rent out 90% of your apartment, whatever, and you just make like a 70% savings or more every month, and you don't really live until you retire, right? And then
Yeah,
when you retire, you kind of like get off the grid or whatever. And for people who want to do that, I think that's great, but that's also very risky, right? Because then what if hyperinflation happens, or what if something really bad happens and you've just been out of the job market for too long? That can be a bit risky. So
definitely.
I'm more of like the slow fire movement, where you like you aim for it and maybe you miss a bit, but you kind of like you have the mark in your head.
I think it's the retire early bit that is sometimes problematic when people get obsessed with it.
Yeah.
Because obviously financial independence is a net positive, right? There's nothing bad about that. It's when you're rushing to retire early, and you're sacrificing the present for the future. I can see that not being great. You see these Reddit posts by people who are like, "Oh, I'm only saving 80%," and I broke up with my girlfriend because I couldn't afford to have a girlfriend, and stuff like that. Where you're like,
Yeah, exactly.
just chill out a bit, dude. It would be better to focus on having a job that you enjoy, kind of thing.
All right.
Where do
Hit
you
me.
see the future of Japan? Because obviously we've got these demographic problems, we've got the weak yen at the moment. There seems to be a bunch of different crises that are converging. Do you see the future of Japan as a rosy future, or are we in the doom and gloom camp?
I am neither. I think I'm very much in between, but I'm definitely not in the doom and gloom camp. Like, I mean, if doom and gloom happens, it probably will happen all around the world, with everything that's going on. But I think that people kind of forget that Japan's, you know, if you look at Japan, right, it's for 30 years, not much has happened. Things have been very stable. And even though that's false, that narrative is false to some extent, I think that's also true. And the true part of it makes Japan an extremely stable country. So, you have these things that in other countries would be horrendous, like national debt that's 240% of GDP. You have a rapidly aging population. But I think the benefit there is that Japanese people are kind of going along with it. Like, there's no riots. There's no, retired people striking in mass because their pensions are getting lowered. They're just kind of accepting that this is the reality. And I think that alone makes Japan so stable. And where if they just get a little bit more push in innovation and trying to change society, I think people will be on board as a necessary evil, because this country is not a country that, like, for example, France. I like to take that as an example, right? Where you trying to do these changes that are necessary, that every scientist and politician can see will have detrimental consequences in 10 or 15 years. And as soon as they just try to go 10% there, everybody protests, gets shut down, the governor or whatever gets voted out, and then they have to start the process all over again. And Japan is way slower in moving than France, but they also make those changes happen. And so I think that kind of shows that when you have a stable country like this, investments will thrive in Japan, I think. And with Asia growing, I think Japan will naturally grow with it. And so, yes, it will not be, the richest country in the world ever again, I think. But it is really impressive that Japan is still the world's third richest country. It's richer than India, a country with 1.4 billion people, right? So it's just like people forget that Japan is still such a powerhouse, and I think it's gonna continue to be that way.
Awesome. So you're quite optimistic. Can you see yourself leaving Japan in the future? And if so, why might that be?
I can. I think there are issues here that as a Swedish person or half Swedish, some issues I'm still struggling a bit with. Childcare in Japan is good. It's good for American standards and in some ways Asian standards too, but like compared to many European countries, I think Japan still lags behind a lot. So I don't have children now, but if I do, depending on how hard it is, I might consider moving. And then secondly, I think this is on all our minds, but there will likely be a massive earthquake in Tokyo in the coming years. We don't know when. It could happen tomorrow. It could be in the next 100 years. But if that happens and if the impacts are horrendous, and God forbid, I hopefully survive, but that's something that I think would make anyone consider leaving, including me.
No political fears.
So it's really interesting, right? Because Japan is, it is a democracy, but they've had the same party for the better half of the century. It's not, I'm not a particular fan of the Liberal Democrats, the party that basically runs Japan, but they're stable and they do what's necessary. To a certain extent, that's better than 80% of the world. So I'm relatively happy to be here in a political sense.
Yeah, I'm similar. So I'm planning to stay. I could see us leaving. Like, for example, we thought about leaving with the Fukushima thing until we saw the situation, and then and I can see a future kind of disaster maybe, or some kind of political change where it becomes unfriendly, but I think there's a very low probability. And the other one's climate change, right? Obviously this summer's been unpleasant, and it's likely to get more unpleasant in the future, so it's kind of where that ends up, I guess. So for me it's always
like, where are you gonna leave, where
are you
gonna go?
Yeah, trying to find the ideal climate somewhere, like maybe New Zealand, like
That's what the billionaires do, so it can't be too bad.
Have you got any final kind of advice for our listeners in terms of learning about investing, starting investing?
I think I just want to end with saying, that to anyone who's listening, anyone who's, on the fence on investing and feel like, as soon as they start searching for companies, they just get overwhelmed and they give up. I think, start small. Rome wasn't built in a day, right? But then, like, if you just start and look at the facts and the simple numbers, you can really build a foundation of the house that will become your nest egg. And, investments grow over time. Like almost all good investments grow over time. And so if you just start small, sooner or later, you will have a massive house that's all yours. And that's just because of compounding interest and just how the stock markets work. You can truly build something great without much effort.
Yeah, I think that's the message, isn't it? Just get started, try and learn as much as possible, and you'll be surprised how much you can do in a couple of decades, is what I found. So I started 15 years ago, and yeah, I'm amazed at the progress. Awesome. It was great talking to you, Ray. Thank you very much. And everyone definitely check out Konichi Value, both on Substack and on YouTube.